Welcome back. Tonight's story is called The Last Door. Turn off your lights and never, I mean never, answer a knock after midnight. Priya was the kind of person who found the sun too loud. For her, the world only started to make sense after 11 p.m. when the city of Pune finally tucked itself in. She was a freelance architectural restorer. Her days were spent in the dust of old libraries, obsessing over blueprints of buildings that had long been forgotten. It was a lonely job, but it suited her. She didn't mind the silence. In fact, she craved it. 6 months ago, she had been living in a cramped, noisy hostel near the university. The constant hum of traffic and the chatter of roommates had begun to fray her nerves. She needed a place where she could think, where she could hear her own breath. That's when she found it. Flat 4B.
The rent was impossibly low, the kind of price that usually suggests a plumbing disaster or a terrible neighborhood. But the building was beautiful, an old colonial-style apartment block with high ceilings and heavy teakwood doors. The landlord, a man who refused to meet her eyes during the signing, simply said the previous tenant had left in a hurry and didn't want the deposit back. Priya didn't ask questions. She saw the bay window that looked out over the Gulmohar trees and the thick walls that promised total isolation. She thought she had found a sanctuary. Her routine became a ritual. She would wake up at noon, work through the afternoon in the soft glow of her desk lamp, and then, as the rest of the world headed to sleep, her real day would begin. By midnight, she would be on her 3rd cup of ginger tea. She loved the stillness of flat 4B. She loved the way the shadows of the tree branches danced on her floorboards. She felt like the only person left on earth. But that was the problem with total silence. You notice things. A floorboard creaking when you're sitting perfectly still. The smell of old, damp earth in a room with no plants. And the feeling that even when you are alone, the space around you is occupied.
It was a Tuesday, 12:04 a.m. Priya had just turned off her laptop. The silence was absolute. 3 slow taps, deliberate, patient. She told herself it was a neighbor, a drunk one. She wrapped herself in her shawl and padded to the door, but stopped just short of opening it. The air near the door was cold, too cold. "Who is it?" she called. Silence. Then, in a voice that sounded almost like a child, yet hollow, as if spoken through a pipe, 3 whispered words. "I am lost." Priya pressed her eye to the peephole. The hallway was empty. The flickering light at the end of the corridor cast long, distorted shadows, but no one was there. And yet, she could hear breathing, heavy, wet breathing, coming from the other side of the wood. Priya didn't sleep that first night. She sat on the edge of her sofa, clutching her phone until the screen burned her palms. By 6 a.m., the sun began to bleed through the Gulmohar trees, turning the hallway from a tunnel of shadows back into a mundane corridor of peeling paint and dusty carpets.
She felt foolish in the daylight. It was a prank, she whispered to the empty room, or a dream. But she couldn't shake the memory of that voice. "I am lost." It hadn't sounded like it came through the door. It sounded like it came from the wood itself. She went downstairs to the small, cramped security booth near the gate. The watchman, Mr. Kadam, was a man who had seen 40 years of tenants come and go. He was usually full of gossip, but when Priya asked to see the footage from the 4th floor, his smile vanished. "Why?" he asked, his hand hovering over the mouse. "I think someone was trying to get into my flat at midnight. Priya said, trying to sound firm. Mr. Kadam didn't argue. He pulled up the grid of grainy, blue-tinted screens. They found the camera for the 4th-floor corridor. 12 a.m. The hallway is empty. A single light bulb at the far end flickers, a slow, rhythmic pulse. 12:01 a.m. Nothing. 12:03 a.m. Priya sees herself on screen. She sees her own door. The camera angle is high, looking down the length of the hall. She sees the moment she walked to the door and pressed her ear against it. "There," Priya pointed. "Look, there's no one there, but I was talking to someone. I heard them." Mr. Kadam leaned in. "Wait," he muttered. At exactly 12:04 a.m., the screen didn't just flicker. A heavy digital blackness swallowed the feed. It wasn't static. It was a solid, void-like square that sat over the footage of her doorway. For 90 seconds, the clock on the bottom of the screen kept ticking, but the image was dead.
"Cable fault," Kadam said, but his voice was shaking. "Look at the other cameras," Priya urged. They checked the lobby, the stairs, the elevator. No one had entered the building. No one had left. But then Priya noticed something in the elevator feed from 12:05 a.m., just as the black square on her floor vanished. The elevator doors on the ground floor opened. No one walked out, but the weight sensor on the floor of the elevator triggered. The digital display inside the lift dipped, as if someone invisible, had stepped inside. Priya left the booth without a word. She realized then that logic wasn't going to save her. Mr. Kadam called out to her as she reached the stairs. "Priya Betty," he called, his voice barely a whisper. "The woman who lived there before. The one who left in the night. She used to complain about the silence too. She said the silence in 4G wasn't empty. She said it was full. Priya didn't go to a hotel. It sounds foolish looking back, but 4B was hers. She had signed the lease. She had arranged her books. She had reclaimed her life here. To leave because of a black square on a monitor felt like surrendering to a shadow. She prepared for the night like a soldier. She brewed a pot of coffee she knew she shouldn't drink. She turned on every light in the flat, the desk lamp, the overheads, the small fairy lights draped over her mirror. The apartment was a fortress of artificial gold. By 11:30 p.m., the silence began to thicken. Have you ever noticed how silence has a sound? A high-pitched ring that sits at the back of your skull.
Priya sat in the center of her bed, her back against the headboard. She didn't work. She didn't read. She just watched the clock on her phone. 11:58, 11:59, 12. The front door didn't knock. The hallway remained silent. Priya let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "See?" she whispered. "Nothing." At 12:04 a.m., the temperature didn't just drop, it plummeted. Priya saw her own breath mist in the air, a white ghost of a sigh. Then it started, not at the door. Thump, a heavy, dull sound from the kitchen. It sounded like someone had dropped a sack of wet sand on the floor. Thump. The sound moved. It was in the hallway now. Thump. It was at her bedroom door. Priya pulled her knees to her chest. She stared at the bedroom door, waiting for the wood to rattle, waiting for the handle to turn. But the door didn't move. The sound didn't come from the outside. It came from the wall, right next to her ear. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't a knock on the wall. It was a knock inside the wall, as if something was trapped between the brick and the plaster, desperate to get out, or desperate to get in. She screamed, a raw, jagged sound that tore through the flat and bolted. She didn't grab her keys. She didn't grab her shoes. She ran into the stairwell.
her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird in a cage. Old Mr. Rajan from 4C was already standing in his doorway, holding a glass of water. He didn't look surprised to see a girl in her pyjamas, shaking and breathless. He looked pitying.
"The floorboard, child," he said, his voice like dry parchment. "Under the wardrobe. The previous tenant. She thought she was alone too. But the house remembers everyone who ever lost themselves here." The next morning, with the sun safely up and Mr. Rajan standing guard, Priya pushed aside her heavy teak wardrobe. She found the loose board. It didn't look like much, just a gap in the wood. Inside was a small black and white photograph. It was a woman standing in front of a door, the door to flat 4B. Her hand was raised, caught in the middle of a knock. She looked tired. She looked lost. Priya turned the photo over. The ink was faded, but the message was clear. "I've been knocking for 30 years. Why won't you let me in?" Priya left that day. She didn't take her furniture. She didn't take her books. She just took her life. The flat is listed again. The rent is still impossibly low. The walls are thick, the ceilings are high, and the silence is absolute. It's the perfect sanctuary for someone looking to be alone. But if you're sitting in your room tonight, if you're enjoying the stillness of the late hour, just do me a favor. Put your ear against the wall, not the door, the wall. Listen closely. Are you sure that sound is just the pipes, or is someone still waiting for you to answer? That was the last door. If you're watching this after midnight, maybe keep the lights on for a while. Subscribe for more stories, and sleep well, if you can.